There is a conversation happening inside your mind right now. You may not notice it. You may not even realize that you're participating in it. But it's there. You opened this video. You were already talking to yourself. Maybe you were thinking about something that happened yesterday. Maybe you were wondering what someone thinks about you. Maybe you were worried about money. Maybe you were thinking about your future. Maybe you were comparing yourself to someone else. Maybe there was a quiet sentence running underneath everything. I don't know what is going to happen. And here's the question that could completely change the way you see your life. What if the conversation you have with yourself every day is more important than the conversation you have with anyone else? Think about that. You may speak to another person for an hour, but you speak to yourself all day. You speak to yourself when you wake up. You speak to yourself when you look in the mirror. You speak to yourself while driving. You speak to yourself while working. You speak to yourself when somebody doesn't respond. You speak to yourself when you make a mistake. You speak to yourself when you see your bank account. You speak to yourself when you imagine your future. And most importantly, you speak to yourself when nobody else is listening. That private conversation may be one of the most powerful habits you've ever developed. Neville Goddard repeatedly emphasized the importance of inner conversations, not merely what you say out loud, not the affirmations you post online, not what you tell your friends, but the conversations that exist inside your imagination, the conversations you replay, the conversations you anticipate, the conversations you have with imaginary versions of other people, and the conversations you have about yourself. Because here's the dangerous part. You can say, "I'm confident," for 5 minutes, and then spend the next 12 hours internally telling yourself, "I'm not good enough." Which conversation do you think is becoming familiar? Which one are you rehearsing? Which one feels natural? And what if the answer to that question explains why so many people feel stuck? Because they are trying to create a new life, while continuously talking themselves back into the old one, the hidden conversation. Let's make this personal. Imagine you send a message to someone. You wait. 5 minutes, nothing. 10 minutes, nothing. 30 minutes, still nothing. Now the external event is incredibly simple. There is no reply. That's all you actually know. But watch what the mind does. It starts talking. Why aren't they answering? Did I say something wrong? Oh, maybe they're losing interest. Maybe they don't care. I knew this would happen. And suddenly, there is an entire emotional story. Nothing external changed. The person hasn't even said anything. But internally, you've already experienced rejection. You've already experienced abandonment. You've already created an explanation. You've already changed your emotional state. And then you spend the rest of the day reacting to a story that your own mind created. This happens constantly. Someone looks at you differently, and you create a meaning. Your boss sends a short message, and you create a meaning. A payment is delayed, and you create a meaning. Someone succeeds, and you create a meaning about yourself. The event is one thing, the conversation you have about the event is another, and that second part is where your power begins. You are constantly interpreting. Human beings don't simply experience reality, we interpret it. Two people can experience the exact same event and walk away with completely different emotional experiences. One person loses an opportunity and thinks, "I'm finished." Another thinks, "That wasn't the right opportunity." One person gets rejected and thinks, "Nobody wants me." Another thinks, "That wasn't my person." One person experiences a delay and thinks, "Nothing ever works." Another thinks, I'll keep moving. The event is real, but the identity attached to the event is different. This is why your inner conversation matters, because you are constantly teaching your mind what things mean. The sentence you repeat becomes a belief. Think about a sentence you've said about yourself for years. Maybe, I'm bad with money. Maybe, I'm always late. Maybe, I never get lucky. Maybe, people always leave me. Maybe, I'm not confident. Maybe, I'm just not that kind of person. At first, that sentence was probably just a thought, but you repeated it. Then you saw evidence. Then you repeated it again. Eventually, you stopped questioning it. It became part of your identity. You don't say, I currently have a belief that I'm bad with money. You simply say, I'm bad with money. Notice the difference. The behavior has become identity. And once something becomes identity, you unconsciously act in ways that remain consistent with it. The mind loves consistency. Your mind wants your beliefs and behavior to match. If you believe, I'm not confident, you may avoid situations that require confidence. Then you have fewer experiences proving that you can be confident. So you say, see, I'm not confident. The belief creates behavior. The behavior creates evidence. The evidence strengthens the belief, and the cycle continues. But here's where the cycle can be interrupted. You don't necessarily have to change everything externally first. You can begin with the conversation. What if you spoke to yourself differently? Imagine waking up tomorrow. Instead of immediately thinking, I have so much to worry about, you said, I can handle today. Instead of, something is going to go wrong, you said, I don't know what today will bring, but I can meet it. Instead of, I'm behind, you said, I'm moving forward. Instead of, nobody notices me, you said, I am becoming more confident in who I am. Instead of, what if this fails? You said, I'll learn, I'll adjust, I'll keep going. Notice something. These statements don't require you to pretend. You don't have to convince yourself that your life is perfect. You're simply changing the direction of the conversation. And that is the experiment we're going to begin. The 3-day experiment. For the next 3 days, I want you to do something extremely simple. Talk to yourself differently. That's it. But there's a catch. You are not going to spend all day repeating robotic affirmations. You are not going to force yourself to be positive. You are not going to pretend problems don't exist. You are not going to deny what you see. Instead, you're going to become aware of your inner conversations. And when you catch yourself rehearsing an old story, you're going to interrupt it. Then you're going to choose a different response. 3 days. Not because 3 days is some magical number, but because 3 days is long enough to observe your patterns, and short enough to make the experiment feel achievable. Day 1 is not about changing. Day 1 is about seeing. This is where most people make a mistake. They immediately try to change their thoughts, but you can't consistently change something you haven't learned to notice. So day one begins with observation. For one day, become a witness. Listen to yourself. Don't judge. Don't fight. Just listen. When you wake up, what is the first thing you tell yourself? Is it, I'm tired. I don't want to get up. I have too much to do. I hate my life. I wonder what happened yesterday. Or maybe, let's see what today brings. There is no right or wrong answer. You're collecting information. Because most people don't know what their default inner conversation sounds like. The mirror moment. Now imagine standing in front of a mirror. What do you say to yourself? Not necessarily out loud. What happens internally? Do you immediately notice what you dislike? Your face, your body, your age, your hair, something you wish were different? Or do you simply see yourself? That moment matters. Because your relationship with yourself is happening constantly. You cannot escape it. You can leave a toxic relationship. You can block someone. You can change your job. You can move cities. But you cannot escape your own inner voice. You take it everywhere. So why not make that voice a place you actually feel safe? The inner critic. For many people, the inner voice isn't a guide. It's a critic. It says, you should have done better. Why did you say that? You look terrible. Everyone else is ahead. You're wasting your time. You'll probably fail anyway. And because nobody else hears it, you assume it doesn't matter. But imagine another person spoke to you that way all day. Would you stay around them? Would you call them supportive? Would you trust them? Probably not. Yet you may have been speaking to yourself that way for years. This doesn't mean you should lie to yourself. Now let's make an important distinction. Changing your inner conversation does not mean lying. If you're struggling, you don't have to say, everything is perfect. If you're disappointed, you don't have to say, I'm thrilled. If you're afraid, you don't have to pretend you're fearless. Instead, you can say, I'm afraid, but I can handle this. You can say, this hurts, but it doesn't define me. You can say, I don't understand this yet. You can say, I don't know how this ends. And then, but I don't need to assume the worst. That is a much stronger conversation. The power of yet. One tiny word can completely change the psychological meaning of a sentence. Yet. I don't understand it yet. I haven't achieved it yet. I haven't found the answer yet. It hasn't happened yet. I don't know how yet. That word prevents your current circumstance from becoming a permanent identity. Compare. I can't do this. With. I haven't figured this out yet. One closes the door. The other leaves it open. Neville and the inner conversation. Neville Goddard's teachings frequently return to the idea that imagination isn't something you use only when sitting quietly with your eyes closed. Your imagination is active throughout the day. When you imagine what someone will say, you're using imagination. When you rehearse an argument before it happens, you're using imagination. When you picture yourself failing, you're using imagination. When you replay something that happened, you're using imagination. So the question isn't, do I use imagination? You already do. The question is, what am I repeatedly imagining? And even more importantly, what conversation am I repeatedly rehearsing? You may be manifesting the same story. Consider someone who constantly thinks, people don't respect me. They enter conversations expecting disrespect. They interpret neutral comments negatively. They become defensive. Others notice the defensiveness. The interaction becomes uncomfortable. Then the person thinks, see, people don't respect me. The original assumption gets reinforced. Now imagine changing the inner conversation. Before entering the room, I am calm. I respect myself. I don't need to prove anything. Now the person's behavior changes. Their posture changes. Their tone changes. Their reactions change. The interaction may change. And even if the other person behaves badly, the individual doesn't automatically collapse. That is the power of identity. You don't need everyone to change. This is where the practice becomes incredibly freeing. You don't need to control another person's mind. You don't need to force them to behave differently. You don't need to convince them. You need to decide who you are in the conversation. Imagine someone criticizes you. Old inner dialogue. They think I'm stupid. Maybe they're right. New inner dialogue. They can have their opinion. I know who I am. That's strength. Imagine someone doesn't choose you. Old dialogue. What's wrong with me? New dialogue. Their choice doesn't determine my worth. That's strength. Imagine an opportunity disappears. Old dialogue. I missed my chance. New dialogue. There can be another opportunity. That's strength. The first rule of the 3 days. Here is rule number 1. Do not attack yourself for having old thoughts. This is extremely important. If you spend the entire day thinking, why am I so negative? Why can't I think properly? I'm failing at manifestation. You have simply created another negative inner conversation. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is awareness. When you catch the old thought, say, interesting. Then redirect, that's all. Think of it like training a dog. Imagine a dog has been trained to run toward a certain sound. Every time it hears the sound, it automatically reacts. Now you begin training it differently. At first it still runs. You gently redirect, again, again, again. Eventually the new response becomes stronger. Your mind can be trained similarly. A familiar thought appears. You notice it. You redirect. A few minutes later, the old thought returns. You redirect again. No anger, no shame, just repetition. Your first replacement phrase. You don't need hundreds of affirmations. Start with one. Things are working out for me. But don't repeat it mechanically. Use it when something triggers you. You miss an opportunity. Things are working out for me. Someone doesn't reply. Things are working out for me. You make a mistake. Things are working out for me. You don't understand the next step. Things are working out for me. Notice what you're doing. You're not claiming you know the exact outcome. You're choosing the assumption that the story isn't against you. What if you don't believe it? You might say, "But I don't believe that everything is working out." That's okay. Don't force it. Use a bridge statement. I'm open to the possibility that things can work out. Or, I don't know how this will unfold, but I don't need to assume the worst. That's enough. You are opening a door. You aren't trying to kick it down. The second replacement phrase. Here's another. I can handle what comes next. This is incredibly powerful because it doesn't require certainty. You don't need to know what comes next. You only need to trust your ability to respond. Think about how different that feels from, what if everything goes wrong? The first creates capacity. The second creates helplessness. The third replacement phrase. And finally, I don't need to figure everything out today. This is especially powerful for people who constantly overthink, because anxiety often demands complete certainty. It says, you need to know. You need to decide. You need to predict. You need to solve this now. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes the next step becomes visible only after you take the current one. So tell yourself, I don't need to figure everything out today. What to do when the old story returns? It will return. Expect it. You might wake up tomorrow and suddenly think, this isn't working. Don't panic. That's the old pattern. You can answer, maybe I don't see the full picture yet. Then continue your day. You don't have to spend 30 minutes analyzing why the thought appeared. You don't need to fight it. You simply don't feed it. The dangerous habit of rehearsing the worst. There's another reason inner conversation matters. Many people rehearse disasters before a meeting. They're going to think I'm stupid. Before a date, they're probably going to reject me. Before an interview, I'm going to mess up. Before opening an email, it's probably bad news. Notice the pattern. The event hasn't happened, but the mind is already practicing the emotional response. Then when the event happens, the emotional reaction feels familiar. Why? Because you've rehearsed it. So here's your challenge. Stop rehearsing conversations you don't want to experience. Instead, rehearse the version you want, the conversation you want. Imagine you're about to have an important conversation. Instead of imagining conflict, imagine calm. Hear yourself speaking clearly. Imagine the other person listening. Imagine yourself remaining grounded. You don't need to control them. You're simply practicing your own state. This is where imagination becomes practical. The 3-day promise. For the next 3 days, you are going to make one promise to yourself. I will not intentionally rehearse the worst version of my future. You might still have fear, that's human, but you won't feed it deliberately. You won't replay imaginary disasters for hours. You won't create arguments that haven't happened. You won't constantly predict rejection. When the mind begins, you'll interrupt, and you'll say, let's imagine something else. Night 1. Your first revision. Tonight, before you sleep, choose one conversation from today. Maybe someone said something that bothered you. Maybe you felt embarrassed. Maybe you criticized yourself. Maybe you worried about the future. Close your eyes, relax. Now replay the moment, but this time, change the conversation. Imagine the person saying something supportive. Imagine yourself responding calmly. Imagine yourself feeling secure. Don't make it elaborate, a few seconds is enough. Then allow the scene to fade. The purpose is not to pretend history didn't happen. The purpose is to stop rehearsing the emotional pattern. Why before sleep? The period before sleep is naturally quieter. Your attention turns inward. The day's noise begins to disappear. And instead of filling that final space with anxiety, you can give your mind a different conversation. Don't scroll endlessly. Don't replay every problem. Don't ask, what if tomorrow goes wrong? Instead, ask, what would I like tomorrow to feel like? Then imagine it. Your last thought. Imagine falling asleep tonight with this sentence. Tomorrow is another opportunity. Not. Tomorrow must fix everything. Not. Tomorrow has to prove my manifestation worked. Simply. Tomorrow is another opportunity. Feel the difference. There is no desperation, there is no pressure, there is possibility, and now, here is the first major realization. You may have spent years trying to change your life by changing circumstances. New job, new relationship, new city, new routine, new goals, new techniques. But what if the deeper change begins somewhere much quieter? Inside the sentence you say to yourself after something goes wrong. Inside the story you tell yourself when nobody chooses you. Inside the meaning you give a delay. Inside the assumptions you carry into every conversation. Because if you change the circumstances, but keep the same identity, you may recreate the same emotional experience in a different form. But if you change the identity, something fascinating begins to happen. You start responding differently. You start noticing different possibilities. You stop chasing certain things. You become more selective. You become calmer. You begin taking different actions. And eventually, your external life can begin reflecting the person you've become. The question for tonight. So before you sleep, I want you to ask yourself one question. Not, when will my manifestation happen? Not, where is my sign? Not, why hasn't anything changed? Ask. If I already knew that my life was moving in the right direction, how would I speak to myself tonight? Listen carefully. What would you say? Maybe, you're okay. Keep going. You don't have to rush. You are becoming stronger. You are allowed to expect good things. You don't need to know how yet. Whatever comes naturally. Say it. And then let yourself rest. Because tomorrow, we're going to take this much deeper. Day one was about catching the old voice. But catching it isn't enough. Because once you see the old story, you need to learn how to replace it. And that's where Neville's idea of living from the end becomes incredibly powerful. Tomorrow, you're not going to talk to yourself like someone who is waiting. You're going to learn how to talk to yourself like someone who has already crossed the bridge. Like someone who no longer asks, will it happen? But quietly thinks, of course it will. I already know who I am. And when you learn how to have that conversation naturally, the entire 3-day experiment changes. Part 2 begins with one question. What would you say to yourself if the thing you wanted was no longer a question? Yesterday, we discovered something most people never consciously examine. You are always talking to yourself, not occasionally, not only when you're stressed, always. And that conversation quietly tells you who you are. But today, we're going one step deeper, because noticing the old conversation is only the beginning. The real transformation starts when you ask, what would I say to myself if the thing I wanted was no longer a question? Think about that. Imagine you've spent months worrying about something. Maybe money, maybe love, maybe your career, maybe your future, maybe whether you're finally going to become the person you've always wanted to be. Right now, your internal conversation may sound like, when is it going to happen? What if it doesn't? Why hasn't it happened yet? Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I need another technique. Maybe I need another sign. Maybe I should try harder. And every one of those questions contains the same hidden message. I don't have it yet. You may say you're believing, but your inner conversation is describing absence. You may say you're trusting, but internally you're checking. You may say you're living in the end, but you're constantly looking at the beginning. And today, we're going to change that. The difference between wanting and having. Imagine you're waiting for a package. You ordered something online. You know it's coming. You might check the tracking number once, maybe twice, but you don't spend every waking minute screaming, "Where is it?" Why? Because as far as you're concerned, it's already yours. The package is simply traveling toward you. That's an interesting mental state. There is no desperation. There is no frantic searching. There is expectation. Now compare that with someone who doesn't believe the package is coming. They refresh the tracking page every 5 minutes. They check the mailbox. They ask customer service. They wonder if it was lost. They panic. The external situation may be identical. The difference is the state. One person expects, the other person doubts. And Neville's teachings repeatedly return to this distinction. The state of having is different from the state of wanting. The trap of constantly saying, "I want." Listen to your own language. I want to be successful. I want to be loved. I want more money. I want confidence. I want my life to change. There's nothing wrong with wanting something. Desire is natural. But if the majority of your internal conversation remains, "I want," you can accidentally reinforce the identity of "I don't have." So today, we're changing the question. Instead of, "When will I have it?" ask, "What would it feel normal to think if I already had it?" That's different. The ordinary feeling of having. Let's take love. Imagine you're single and desperately hoping someone will love you. Your internal dialogue might be, "Why hasn't anyone chosen me? When will I meet someone? Everyone else has somebody. Maybe something is wrong with me." Now, imagine you've been happily married for 10 years. Would you wake up every morning thinking, "I hope someone loves me today"? Probably not. Love would be normal. You'd think about breakfast, work, plans, bills, dinner, vacation, your partner, life. You wouldn't constantly celebrate the fact that you're loved. It would simply be part of reality. That's the state we're practicing. Make fulfillment ordinary. You don't need to feel ecstatic. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings around manifestation. People think, if I'm truly living in the end, I need to feel unbelievably excited all day. No, think about something you already possess. Your phone, your clothes, your room, your name. You don't spend the entire day feeling emotional because you have them. They're simply yours. That's what naturalness feels like. The feeling of fulfillment can be quiet. It can feel like, of course. I know. It's normal for me. I don't need to prove it. And sometimes, the most powerful assumption is the one that no longer needs constant emotional effort. Day 2. The inner conversation of the future. You. Today we're going to practice something very specific. You're going to talk to yourself from the perspective of the person who has already become what you're trying to become. Not pretending, not lying, not forcing, just asking, if I were already that person, what would my inner conversation sound like? Let's say you're trying to become confident. The old conversation. What if they judge me? The new conversation. I don't need everyone to approve of me. You're trying to become financially secure. Old. What if I never have enough? New. I'm learning to manage money with confidence. You're trying to build a successful channel. Old. Why aren't my views coming? New. I'm becoming better at understanding my audience, creating stronger videos, and improving every upload. Do you notice? The new conversation isn't, I'm already the biggest creator in the world. It's grounded. It's identity-based. It's directional. Your future self doesn't panic the same way. Imagine the version of you who has already overcome the thing you're struggling with. Someone criticizes them. Do they collapse? Probably not. Something doesn't go according to plan. Do they immediately think, my entire life is ruined? Probably not. They've developed a different relationship with uncertainty. They might think, okay, that's unexpected. Then, what can I do next? That's the identity you're practicing, not someone who controls everything, someone who knows they can handle things. The most important sentence of day 2. If you remember only one sentence today, remember this. I don't need to chase what I have already decided is possible for me. Read it again. You don't need to chase. You don't need to beg. You don't need to constantly check. You don't need to manipulate. You don't need to force. You don't need to obsess.
You choose the state.
Then you live. Why people keep looking for signs. This is where many manifestation practices become exhausting. Someone makes an assumption, then immediately starts looking outside for confirmation. Was that a sign? Was that synchronicity? Why did I see that number? Does this mean it's coming? Did that dream mean something? The problem isn't noticing interesting coincidences. The problem is when you become dependent on them. Because if you need a sign to believe, then the sign becomes your source of certainty. But Neville's deeper principle is about the state you occupy. Your inner conviction shouldn't depend on constant external reassurance. What if you stop checking? Imagine waking up tomorrow and deciding, I'm not checking. Not checking whether your manifestation happened. Not checking whether someone changed. Not checking whether the universe sent a sign. Not checking whether the circumstances look different. You simply live, you work, you create, you take action, you enjoy your day. And when your mind asks, but where is it? You answer, it doesn't need to be visible to be possible. Then return to your life. That is a powerful practice. The inner conversation of someone who trusts. Let's imagine two people. Person A, I hope this works. What if it doesn't? Maybe I should try another method. Why haven't I seen results? Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Person B, I'm going to keep moving. I'll figure it out. I'm becoming the person who can handle this. I don't need to panic. Let's see what happens. Which person feels more powerful? Obviously, person B. Not because person B has guaranteed outcomes, but because person B isn't giving uncertainty control over their identity. The inner friend. Today, I want you to become your own inner friend. Imagine you are sitting across from yourself, the version of you who is exhausted, the version of you who has been worrying, the version of you who keeps asking, when? What? Why? How? Look at that person, and instead of criticizing them, say, you don't have to know everything yet. Then, you are allowed to trust yourself. Then, we are going to keep going. Then, this is not the end of the story. That is the kind of internal relationship you want. What would your future self say? Now imagine your future self standing in front of you, not a fantasy version, a realistic version, someone who has developed the qualities you want. They're calmer, more confident, more financially responsible, more emotionally stable, more focused, more selective, more secure. Ask them, what did you stop worrying about? Listen. Maybe they say, I stopped worrying about what everyone thought. Maybe. I stopped trying to control the timing. Maybe. I stopped assuming every delay was rejection. Maybe. I stopped treating every bad day like proof that my life was bad. Maybe. I stopped abandoning myself whenever something went wrong. That is your lesson. Your identity is built in small moments. People think transformation happens during dramatic moments, but most identity change happens quietly. You receive criticism, you don't spiral, you make a mistake, you don't attack yourself, someone doesn't reply, you don't invent a disaster, you experience uncertainty, you don't immediately panic, you have a bad day, you don't declare your entire life broken. Those small moments are training. Every time you respond differently, you strengthen a new identity. The power of course. There's a phrase I want you to experiment with. Of course. Not arrogantly, naturally. Imagine you're becoming confident. Instead of, can I really become confident? Try. Of course I can become more confident. Instead of, could my life actually change? Of course my life can change. Instead of, could things work out? Of course things can work out. This doesn't mean you know the exact outcome. It means you stop treating possibility like an impossible concept. Talking from the end. Neville's idea of living from the end can be misunderstood as pretending. But imagine something simpler. Suppose you're learning to become a successful person. Instead of spending all day thinking, I need to become successful, you ask, how does a successful version of me think about today's problem? That's the useful question. Maybe they don't procrastinate. Maybe they don't seek constant validation. Maybe they make decisions faster. Maybe they protect their attention. Maybe they don't spend 3 hours worrying about one comment. Maybe they understand that one setback isn't the end. Then practice that identity today. The 3-day experiment is getting deeper. Day 1. Observe the conversation. Day 2. Change the conversation. Day 3 will be become the person who naturally speaks that way. But don't jump ahead. Today is about repetition. Because one new thought is interesting, a repeated new thought becomes familiar, and familiarity is powerful. What happens when something triggers you? Let's make this practical. You see someone achieving something you desperately want. Your first thought, why them and not me? Stop. Don't shame yourself. Ask, what would the secure version of me say? Maybe their success doesn't take anything away from me. Then, if they can do it, possibility exists. Then move on. That's it. You're training your attention. When someone rejects you, old, I'm not enough. New, their decision isn't my identity. Old, I'll never find anyone. New, one person's decision cannot predict my future. Old, why does this always happen? Or new, this is one experience. It doesn't have to become a pattern. That last sentence is especially important. One event doesn't have to become your identity. When money becomes the trigger, maybe you check your account and feel anxiety. Instead of immediately spiraling, I'm broke. I'll never have enough. Everything is expensive. Pause. Then say, this number is information. It is not my identity. Then, I can make better decisions. Then, I can create more value. Then, I can improve my financial situation step by step. That's a completely different inner state. You haven't denied the number. You've denied its authority to define who you are when your dream feels far away. This is perhaps the hardest moment. You have a goal. You work toward it. Nothing seems to happen. Weeks pass, maybe months, and your mind says, what's the point? This is where most people abandon their identity. But what if you change the conversation? Instead of, why isn't this happening? Say, what can I improve? Instead of, maybe I'm not meant for this. Say, maybe I'm still learning. Instead of, I'm failing. Say, I'm collecting information. Now failure becomes feedback, delay becomes development, and uncertainty becomes part of the process. You don't need to force the feeling. If you're not feeling confident, don't force confidence. Start with neutrality. Say, I'm willing to become confident. If you're not feeling abundant, say, I'm willing to believe that more is possible. If you're not feeling loved, say, I'm learning to treat myself as someone worthy of love. This is important because transformation becomes sustainable when you stop fighting yourself. The night practice. Tonight, I want you to choose one desire, only one. Now imagine it has become normal, not dramatic, normal. You wake up, it's simply part of your life. Then listen to your internal conversation. What are you thinking? Maybe. I can't believe how much has changed. Maybe. I'm so glad I didn't give up. Maybe. This feels normal now. Maybe. I knew I'd figure it out. 2. Choose one sentence. Then repeat the scene gently. Not 20 minutes. Not with strain. Just long enough for the idea to become familiar. Then sleep. Don't ask, did it work? This is critical. When you wake up tomorrow, do not immediately ask, did it work? That question can return you to waiting. Instead, ask, who am I today? Then live accordingly. If your desired identity is confident, move confidently. If your desired identity is disciplined, take the next disciplined action. If your desired identity is secure, don't beg for reassurance. If your desired identity is calm, don't feed every thought. This is how inner conversation becomes behavior. The biggest secret of day 2. Here it is. You don't change your life by constantly thinking about the thing you want. You change your relationship with yourself. Because when you become different, your decisions become different. Your standards become different. Your reactions become different. Your attention becomes different. Your behavior becomes different. And those things matter. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you don't feel the same desperation anymore. The desire is still there, but the panic is gone. You still want the relationship, but you're not begging for proof. You still want the money, but you're not defining yourself by today's number. You still want the success, but you're not treating every slow day like failure. You still want the dream, but you're not destroying yourself trying to force the timeline. Something has changed, not necessarily the outside. You changed first, and that may be the beginning, the person who knows. There is a huge difference between saying, I hope everything works out, and I know I can handle whatever comes next. The second person doesn't need certainty, they have something better. Self-trust. And self-trust changes everything, because once you trust yourself, you stop needing the world to constantly reassure you. Tonight, ask yourself, if I trusted myself completely, what would I stop saying to myself? Maybe you'd stop saying, I'm behind. I'm not enough. Nobody wants me. I'm unlucky. I'll probably fail. What if everything goes wrong? Then ask, what would I say instead? Maybe. I'm learning. I'm becoming. I'm capable. I can handle this. There are more possibilities than I can currently see. I don't need to know how yet. And finally, things are working out for me. Tomorrow is day 3, and day 3 is where this experiment becomes much more interesting, because knowing what to say isn't enough. Repeating a sentence isn't enough. Even imagining the future isn't enough. Eventually, the new conversation has to become natural. You have to reach the point where you don't consciously remember to think differently. You simply do. When something goes wrong, you respond differently. When something unexpected happens, you respond differently. When somebody leaves, you respond differently. When opportunity appears, you respond differently. When fear arrives, you respond differently. And that's when you'll discover the real purpose of these 3 days. Not manifestation as a performance, not positive thinking as a mask, not pretending, but identity. Because the final question isn't, did my desire appear? The final question is, who did I become while I was waiting? And tomorrow, we answer that question. What if the most important thing you're going to change isn't your circumstances? What if it's the person who is looking at those circumstances? Because 2 people can stand in the exact same situation and experience completely different realities. One sees a dead end, the other sees a detour. One sees rejection, the other sees redirection. One sees delay, the other sees time to prepare. One sees failure, the other sees information. The external world may look identical, but internally, they are living in 2 completely different worlds. And that difference begins with one thing: the conversation they have with themselves. For the last 2 days, you've been watching that conversation. You caught the old story, you interrupted it, you began replacing it. But today, we go deeper. Because eventually you don't want to spend your entire life correcting yourself. You don't want to walk around thinking, wait, what should I say now? Was that the right thought? Am I doing this correctly? No, the goal is something much more natural. You want the new conversation to become who you are. You want confidence to become normal. You want self-respect to become normal. You want peace to become normal. You want possibility to become normal. You want expecting good things to become normal. And most importantly, you want to stop returning to the old identity every time life challenges you. That is what day 3 is about. You are not trying to become perfect. Let's start by removing one enormous misunderstanding. You are not trying to become someone who never has a negative thought. That person doesn't exist. Fear will appear, doubt will appear, anger will appear, sadness will appear, uncertainty will appear. You may wake up one morning and feel completely discouraged. You may receive news you didn't want. Someone may disappoint you. A plan may fail. You may make a mistake. None of that means the practice has failed. The real question is what happens next. Do you stay inside the old story, or do you return to your chosen identity? That return is the practice. The old you doesn't disappear overnight. Think about a path through a forest. If you've walked the same path for years, the path becomes obvious. You don't even have to think about it. You simply walk. Your old thought patterns are like that path. You've walked them thousands of times. I'm not good enough. Nothing works. People always leave. I'm behind. I'm unlucky. I'll probably fail. These thoughts are familiar, and familiarity can feel like truth. But familiar doesn't mean true. It simply means practiced. And what has been practiced can be practiced differently. The first time you take the new path. Imagine you've spent years believing, I always mess things up. Now something goes wrong. The old thought appears immediately. There it is again. I knew I'd messed this up. But this time, you stop. You take a breath and say, "No, that's not the story I'm continuing." Then, I made a mistake. I can learn from it. That moment may feel small, but it isn't, because you just created a new path. You didn't erase the old one, you simply refused to walk it. Do that enough times, and eventually, the new path becomes easier. Day 3 is about response. This is the most important part. You can't control every event, but you can practice controlling your response. Someone criticizes you. Pause. I don't need to prove myself. Someone ignores you. Pause. Their silence doesn't define my worth. You make a mistake. Pause. I can correct this. Something takes longer than expected. Pause. Delay isn't the same as denial. You don't know what happens next. Pause. I can handle the next step when it arrives. This is how your inner conversation becomes a way of living. The person you want to become has a different default. Let's imagine 2 versions of you. Version 1 wakes up and immediately checks the phone. No message, instant anxiety. Nobody cares. Something is wrong. Why hasn't anything changed? Version 2 wakes up. No message. They notice it. They continue their morning. Why? Because their identity isn't dependent on immediate external reassurance. That's a huge shift. Version 2 isn't necessarily more fortunate. They simply aren't giving every external event permission to determine their internal state. The question, who am I now? This is the question I want you to begin using today. Whenever something happens, instead of immediately asking, "Why is this happening?" ask, "Who am I in this situation?" That changes the entire conversation. If someone rejects you, who am I? Someone unworthy, or someone who respects themselves? If you experience failure, who am I? A failure, or someone learning? If you're uncertain, who am I? Someone helpless, or someone capable of figuring things out? The event may remain, but your identity changes. Neville's state. Neville Goddard often spoke about occupying a state. Think of a state as the mental and emotional position from which you experience life. There is a state of fear, a state of scarcity, a state of rejection, a state of confidence, a state of fulfillment, a state of gratitude, a state of possibility. You move between these states throughout the day. The goal isn't to permanently eliminate every unwanted emotion. The goal is to become more conscious of the state you're occupying, and more deliberate about the state you return to. Your default state matters. Imagine someone who spends most of their day in the state of something bad is about to happen. They may interpret neutral events as threats. They may overthink. They may seek reassurance. They may procrastinate because they're afraid of failure. Now imagine someone whose default state is, "I'll figure it out." They may still experience fear, but they don't live inside it. They act, they adapt, they continue. That's why the inner conversation is so important. Your words aren't magic spells, they're signals. They reinforce the identity you're practicing. The 3-sentence reset. Today, when you feel yourself slipping into the old story, use this 3-step reset. Step 1. Notice. I'm spiraling. Don't judge. Just notice. Step 2. Interrupt. I don't need to continue this conversation. Step 3. Replace. What would I say if I trusted myself? Then answer. Maybe I'll figure this out. Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe I am still moving forward. Maybe things can change. Maybe I don't need to know how yet. That's your practice. Don't turn this into another obsession. This is important. Some people take a useful practice and turn it into another source of anxiety. They start thinking, was that thought negative? Did I ruin my manifestation? Did I say the wrong affirmation? What if I accidentally imagined something bad? Stop. You don't need to monitor every thought. You have thousands of thoughts every day. The goal is not thought perfection. The goal is repeated direction. If you occasionally have a fearful thought, you haven't ruined anything. Return, that's all. Think about the ocean. Imagine the surface of an ocean. Waves are constantly moving. Some are small, some are large. The ocean doesn't need to stop having waves to be the ocean. Your mind is similar. Thoughts are waves. You don't need perfect stillness. You need depth. The deeper you become in your chosen identity, the less every passing thought controls you. A fearful thought can appear, and you can let it pass. Because somewhere deeper, this is just a thought. The most powerful change, stop identifying. Here's a subtle distinction. Instead of, I'm anxious, try, I'm noticing anxiety. Instead of, I'm a failure, try, I'm experiencing disappointment. Instead of, I'm broke, try, I'm currently dealing with a financial challenge. Notice what happened. The experience is real, but you've stopped turning it into identity. You are bigger than the temporary state. Your circumstances do not get the final word. Imagine looking at your life today. Maybe there are things you don't like. Fine. You don't have to deny them, but ask, is this the final chapter? You don't know. And because you don't know, you don't need to treat today's circumstances like a permanent verdict. A photograph captures one moment. Your life is not a photograph, it's a moving story. Stop using the present to predict everything. One of the most destructive habits is this: using today's circumstances to predict your entire future. I'm single now, so I'll always be alone. Money is difficult now, so I'll always struggle. My channel is small now, so I'll never grow. I'm insecure now, so I'll always be insecure. I failed now, so I'll always fail. But that's not logic. That's emotional forecasting. Your present is information. It is not necessarily your destiny. The future is not obligated to copy the past. Your past may explain why you think the way you do, but it doesn't have to determine how you think tomorrow. Maybe you've always been anxious. You can learn calm. Maybe you've always procrastinated. You can learn discipline. Maybe you've always sought approval. You can learn self-respect. Maybe you've always expected disappointment. You can practice expectation. The past created familiarity. The present creates opportunity. Your inner conversation before a big decision. Imagine you're about to make a major decision. Old conversation. What if I make the wrong choice? What if everyone judges me? What if I fail? New conversation. I don't need certainty to move. I can make the best decision I can with what I know. If I need to adjust later, I can. That is emotional freedom. You don't need guarantees. You need trust. Talk to yourself like someone who trusts you. Imagine a parent speaking to a child. A good parent doesn't say, "You better know exactly what you're doing or you're a failure." They say, "Try. Learn. So, I'm here. You can handle it. Oh, let's figure it out." Now imagine giving yourself that same voice. Not weakness, not indulgence, support. There is a difference between being kind to yourself and allowing yourself to avoid responsibility. Self-respect sounds like, "You made a mistake. Fix it." Or, not, "You're worthless." Confidence says, "You can do better." Not, "You'll never succeed." The internal conversation after failure. Let's say you fail. The old voice. "I knew it. I'm terrible. Everyone else is better. What's the point?" Now imagine the new voice. "Okay, that didn't work. Pause. What did I learn? Pause. What can I change? Pause. Let's try again." That conversation creates resilience, and resilience is one of the most powerful identities you can develop. The internal conversation after success. This matters too. Sometimes people sabotage success because they're uncomfortable with it. They achieve something, then immediately minimize it. "It was luck." Anyone could do that. "It doesn't really count." Stop. When something goes well, let yourself acknowledge it. Say, "I'm proud of myself. I handled that well. I'm becoming more capable." You are teaching your mind that success is safe, that achievement is normal, that progress belongs in your identity. The secret of normalization. What you repeatedly experience internally becomes familiar. At first, confidence may feel strange. At first, saying, "I'm capable," might feel uncomfortable. That's okay. You don't need it to feel completely natural immediately. Keep practicing. Eventually, the sentence becomes ordinary. Then your behavior begins matching it. Then the world begins receiving a different version of you when you feel like nothing is happening. This is one of the biggest tests. You've practiced, you've imagined, you've changed your inner dialogue, but externally, nothing seems different. The mind says, "See, it doesn't work." This is where your old identity tries to reclaim you. Instead, say, external evidence isn't the only measure of internal progress. Maybe you're calmer, maybe you're less reactive, maybe you're making better decisions, maybe you're setting boundaries, maybe you're taking action, maybe you're no longer chasing people, maybe you're finally trusting yourself. Those are changes, and they matter. The person who no longer chases. Imagine someone who used to chase attention, chase approval, chase signs, chase reassurance, chase validation. Then one day, they stop. Not because they stopped caring, but because they started believing. I am enough without constantly proving that I am enough. That person behaves differently. They don't beg, they don't force, they don't obsess, they don't constantly ask, "Do you still like me?" They know their value. That is a completely different state. The person who expects possibility. Now imagine another person. They don't assume everything will go perfectly, but they expect possibility. If one door closes, another can open. If something fails, I can learn. If someone leaves, I can still love. If the plan changes, I can adapt. If the timing changes, I can continue. This person is difficult to defeat, not because nothing bad happens, but because they don't turn bad moments into permanent identities. This is what everything is working out can really mean. Maybe the phrase, everything is working out for me, doesn't mean nothing uncomfortable will ever happen. It can mean, I refuse to assume that discomfort means the story is over. That's different. You can experience disappointment without deciding you're doomed. You can experience delay without deciding you're forgotten. You can experience uncertainty without deciding you're powerless. You can experience failure without deciding you're a failure. The 3-day practice becomes a lifestyle. Day 1 taught you. Notice. Day 2 taught you. Replace. Day 3 teaches you. Return. Return to yourself. Return to your chosen identity. Return to possibility. Return to self-respect. Return to the assumption that your future is not limited to your current circumstances. That's the real practice. The night practice, the final revision. Tonight, choose one moment from today. Maybe you became anxious. Maybe you felt rejected. Maybe you doubted yourself. Maybe you compared yourself. Now close your eyes, see the moment again, but this time, watch yourself respond differently. Imagine yourself breathing. Imagine yourself smiling slightly. Imagine yourself saying, "It's okay." Then, "I know who I am." Then, "I'll figure this out." Let that version of you remain in the scene. Don't rush. Let it become familiar. Then release it. The most important question before sleep. Ask, if I woke up tomorrow already confident, how would I behave? Would you check your phone first? Would you seek validation? Would you compare yourself? Would you obsess over one person's opinion? Probably not. You would probably get up, you would live, you would work, you would create, you would take care of yourself, you would trust your direction. So tomorrow, practice that. Not perfectly, just a little, the final test. Tomorrow, something will probably happen that you didn't expect. That's life. And when it happens, you'll have a choice. The old reaction or the new response. Maybe the old voice says, "This is bad." Pause. Then, "Maybe, but I don't know the whole story." The old voice says, "Nothing works." Pause. That's an old assumption. The old voice says, "I'm going to fail." Pause. I can learn. The old voice says, "I'm not enough." Pause. I don't need to prove my worth. That pause is where freedom lives. You are learning to choose. You cannot always choose what appears in your mind, but you can practice choosing what you continue. That's the difference. A thought appears. You notice. You choose. A memory appears. You notice. You choose. Fear appears. You notice. You choose. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions. It means refusing to let every thought become a command, the inner voice you want. So what should you actually say to yourself? Keep it simple. When you're uncertain, "I can handle this." When you're afraid, "I don't need to predict the worst." When you're rejected, "This doesn't define my worth." When you're delayed, "I don't know the whole story yet." When you fail, "I can learn from this." When you succeed, "I'm becoming more capable." When you feel behind, "My path doesn't have to look like theirs." When you want something, "I'm allowed to believe it's possible." When you don't know how, "I don't need to know how yet." And when everything feels uncertain, "Things can still work out for me." Or, the moment you stop fighting yourself. Imagine what life would feel like if you weren't constantly fighting yourself. You wake up, and you're not immediately criticizing yourself. You make a mistake, and you don't destroy yourself. You experience uncertainty, and you don't panic. Someone rejects you, and you don't question your worth. You succeed, and you allow yourself to feel proud. You don't become invincible, you become stable, and stability is powerful. The deeper meaning of Neville's teaching. At its deepest level, Neville's teaching about imagination isn't simply about getting things, it's about the person you occupy, the state you repeatedly return to, the identity you rehearse, the story you accept as yours, because your internal world influences how you walk through the external one. If you constantly imagine rejection, you may behave defensively. If you constantly imagine failure, you may avoid opportunities. If you imagine yourself capable, you may take different risks. If you imagine yourself worthy, you may tolerate less disrespect. If you imagine yourself successful, you may begin behaving like someone who expects progress. This is where imagination becomes practical. The final realization. You may have spent years waiting for something outside yourself to give you permission. Permission to feel confident, permission to feel worthy, permission to believe your life can change, permission to expect something good. But what if you don't need permission? What if you can begin now? Not when the circumstances change, not when someone chooses you, not when your bank account changes, not when your dream becomes visible. Now. You can begin talking to yourself differently now. Emotional climax. One day, you may look back at the version of yourself who constantly worried. You'll remember how many nights you spent wondering, will it happen? Will they come back? Will I succeed? Will my life change? And perhaps you'll wish you could go back and tell that person something. Not, don't worry, everything will be perfect. Something deeper. You would say, stop abandoning yourself every time life becomes uncertain. You would say, you don't need to know everything. You don't need everyone's approval. You don't need to chase every answer. You don't need to treat every delay as rejection. You don't need to make today's circumstances your permanent identity. And finally, talk to yourself like someone you're never going to abandon. The 3-day challenge is over. But the practice doesn't have to be. 3 days was simply the beginning. Now you know the pattern. Day 1. Notice the conversation. Day 2. Change the conversation. Day 3. Become the conversation. And from here, you can continue. Not obsessively, not perfectly, naturally, your new default. Imagine this becoming your normal inner voice. I'll figure it out. I'm allowed to grow. I can handle uncertainty. I don't have to chase. I don't need to prove myself. I can expect good things. I am becoming someone I respect. My past doesn't have to control my future. This moment isn't the whole story. Things can work out for me. Eventually, you won't need to consciously repeat them. They will simply become how you think. And when that happens, the experiment has succeeded. Final cinematic monologue. Narrator. So tonight, before you close your eyes, take one final moment. Forget the circumstances. Forget the unanswered questions. Forget the timeline. Forget the need for proof. Just listen to the voice inside you and ask, what story am I telling myself? If it's an old story, you don't have to hate it. It helped you survive. It may have protected you once, but you don't have to keep living there. You can thank the old story and choose another. One where you are capable, one where you are worthy, one where you are becoming, one where you don't panic every time life changes direction, one where you trust yourself, one where you don't need to chase everything, one where you know, I can handle whatever comes next. And maybe that is the greatest transformation of all. Not getting everything you want overnight, but becoming someone who no longer believes their life is over whenever something goes wrong. Someone who can breathe, someone who can adapt, someone who can continue, someone who can imagine something better. Someone who can speak to themselves with compassion and strength. Someone who can say, this isn't the end. I am still becoming. There is more possible for me. And I don't need to know how yet. For 3 days, you changed the conversation, but perhaps the conversation was never the real destination. Perhaps the destination was discovering that the voice inside your head doesn't have to be your enemy. It can become your guide. It can become your strength. It can become the voice that reminds you who you are, when the outside world temporarily forgets to. So tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before you check the circumstances, before you search for signs, say one thing to yourself. I know who I am, and I am not going back to the old story. Pause, breathe, and begin your day, because the life you're waiting for may require something from you first, not more desperation, not more chasing, not more fear. A new conversation. There is a moment that almost nobody talks about. It happens after you've imagined the future, after you've repeated the affirmation, after you've visualized, after you've prayed, after you've told yourself, it's going to happen. And then you open your eyes, you look around, and nothing appears to have changed. The room looks the same, your bank account looks the same, your phone looks the same, your circumstances look the same, and suddenly, one tiny question enters your mind. But where is it? That question seems harmless, but sometimes it reveals everything, because underneath that question is another one. Do I really believe this? And underneath that, another, can I trust something I cannot see yet? This is where the final stage begins, because the goal was never to spend your entire life convincing yourself that something might happen. The goal was to become the kind of person who no longer needs constant reassurance. Today is not about adding another technique. It's about removing something, the checking, the chasing, the desperation, the endless questioning, the habit of looking outside yourself every few minutes and asking, is it here yet? Because if you've spent the last 3 days changing your inner conversation, there comes a point where you have to let the new story breathe. The difference between trust and checking. Think about ordering something you've already paid for. You know it's coming. You don't stand at the window every second. You don't call the delivery company every 5 minutes. You don't walk outside and scream, why isn't it here yet? You continue living. You make breakfast. You work. You watch something. You sleep. And eventually, there's a knock at the door. Why? Because you already accepted that it was on its way. Now imagine someone who doesn't trust the order. They refresh the tracking page constantly. They check the mailbox. They search their email. They ask, did it ship? Is it coming? Are you sure? That person isn't enjoying the waiting. They're living in uncertainty. And this is what happens when people turn manifestation into constant monitoring. They don't live, they monitor. They don't experience the present. They inspect the present for evidence. And today, we're ending that habit. You don't need to watch the seed. Imagine planting a seed. You put it in the soil, you water it, then you dig it up every morning to see if it's growing. What happens? You interfere with the process. Sometimes the most important thing you can do after beginning is stop disturbing what you've begun. Your inner conversation is similar. You choose an assumption, you practice it, you return to it, and then you live. You don't need to dig it up every hour. The final question isn't when. It's, who am I now? That is the question. Not, when will I get the relationship? But, who am I in relationships? Not, when will I become successful? But, how does the successful version of me behave today? Not, when will I have confidence? But, how does someone who respects themselves talk to themselves? This moves your attention away from waiting and toward identity. The identity shift. Let's imagine you've always thought, I'm someone who gives up. You start changing the inner conversation. Now something becomes difficult. The old identity says, see, this is where you quit. But the new identity says, no, I'm someone who continues. So you continue. That one decision matters, not because it instantly creates a perfect future, but because you've just provided yourself with evidence of a new identity. You are becoming someone who keeps promises to themselves. Your words need action. This is where manifestation becomes practical. If you tell yourself, I'm confident, but constantly avoid every situation that could help you grow. The inner conversation has no support from your behavior. If you say, I'm disciplined, but repeatedly ignore everything you know you need to do, your behavior is contradicting the identity. So ask, what would this version of me actually do today? Then do one small thing, not 20. 1. If you're becoming a creator, create. If you're becoming disciplined, finish one task. If you're becoming confident, have one conversation. If you're becoming financially responsible, make one better financial decision. If you're becoming healthier, take one constructive action. Identity becomes powerful when it begins influencing behavior. The future self doesn't need to be perfect. Your future self isn't someone who never struggles. That's fantasy. Your future self is someone who handles struggle differently. They still have difficult mornings. They still make mistakes. They still experience rejection. They still get frustrated. But they don't turn every difficulty into, this proves I'm doomed. They say, okay, what now? That two-word question can change your life. What now? Not, why me? Not, why always me? Not, what if this never changes? Simply, what now? When life doesn't go according to plan, let's be realistic. Sometimes things won't go your way. You may lose an opportunity, someone may leave, a project may fail, a video may get almost no views, a plan may collapse, a person may disappoint you. You may make the wrong choice. And this is where your new inner conversation is tested. Because it's easy to say, everything is working out for me, when everything is going perfectly. The real test is saying, I don't like this, but I refuse to decide that this is the end. That's strength. The new response to bad news. Imagine receiving disappointing news. The old reaction, this is terrible. Everything is ruined. I knew this would happen. Nothing works for me. The new response. Pause, breathe, then, okay, I didn't expect this. Then, what is actually true right now? Then, what can I control? Then, what's my next move? That's it. You don't need a motivational speech. You need clarity. Don't confuse acceptance with giving up. Acceptance does not mean I don't care. It means I see what's happening without allowing it to destroy my identity. You can accept. This didn't work. While still believing, something else can work. You can accept. They said no. While believing, my life continues. You can accept. I'm not where I want to be. While saying, I'm still moving. That is a mature form of faith. The person who stops begging for proof. There is a moment in personal growth when you realize, I don't need another sign. Not because signs are meaningless, but because you stop making your peace dependent on them. You don't need to see repeating numbers. You don't need a coincidence. You don't need someone to text you at exactly 11:11. You don't need a dream. You don't need a random event to prove that your life is changing. You can simply choose your direction and continue. What if you could trust without evidence? This is a profound question. Can you believe in your capacity before you have proof? Can you believe you can learn something before you're good at it? Can you believe you can become confident before you feel confident? Can you believe you can build something before people recognize it? Can you believe your future can be different from your past? That's where possibility begins. Stop making the past your prophecy. Your past contains evidence, but evidence isn't destiny. You may have failed before. That doesn't mean you always fail. You may have been rejected. That doesn't mean you're always rejected. You may have struggled financially. That doesn't mean you're destined to struggle forever. You may have made terrible decisions. That doesn't mean you're a terrible person. The past tells you what happened. It doesn't automatically tell you what's next. The new inner sentence. Here's one sentence I want you to keep. That was then. This is now. Use it when the past tries to define you. I've always been insecure. That was then. This is now. I've always procrastinated. That was then. This is now. I've always chosen the wrong people. That was then. This is now. I've never succeeded. That was then. This is now. You're not denying the past. You're separating it from your identity. Your future doesn't need permission from your past. Imagine a person who grew up believing they weren't capable. Then, one day, they decide, I'm going to learn. They start. They fail. They continue. They improve. Eventually, something works, then something else, and slowly, the identity changes. Not because someone gave them permission, because they practiced being different. That's the point. The final night. Tonight is different. You aren't going to spend an hour visualizing. You aren't going to force yourself to feel something dramatic. You're going to do something much simpler. Lie down, close your eyes, take a breath, and imagine yourself waking up tomorrow as the person you've been practicing becoming. Notice your first thought. Imagine yourself saying, "Good morning." Then, let's see what today brings. No desperation, no checking, no chasing, just quiet confidence. Imagine one ordinary moment. This is important. Don't imagine only the huge victory. Imagine an ordinary moment after the transformation. You're walking, you're working, you're drinking coffee, you're sitting at your desk, and suddenly you realize, I'm not worrying about this anymore. That's the moment. Not the fireworks, not the applause, not the dramatic manifestation. The quiet moment when the old fear simply isn't running your life anymore. What does fulfillment actually feel like? Sometimes fulfillment isn't excitement. Sometimes it's relief. Sometimes it's calm. Sometimes it's, I don't need to chase this. Sometimes it's, I'm okay. Sometimes it's, I trust myself. Sometimes it's, I know what matters. Sometimes it's, I can let this unfold. This is why naturalness matters. When something becomes part of your identity, you don't constantly announce it, you live it. The conversation after you get what you wanted. Imagine the thing you've wanted finally happens. What do you say to yourself? Maybe. I knew I could do this. Maybe. I'm so grateful I kept going. Maybe. It feels normal now. Notice that last one. It feels normal. That's the destination. Not constant emotional intensity. Naturalness. The conversation before you get it. Now here's the strange part. Why wait until the external event happens to practice that conversation? Why not practice it now? If the future version of you says, I knew I'd figure it out. Practice. I'll figure it out. If the future version says, I stopped chasing. What? Practice. I don't need to chase. If the future version says, I finally trusted myself. Practice. I'm learning to trust myself. You're building continuity between who you are now and who you're becoming. Your inner voice becomes your home. You will spend more time with yourself than with anyone else. So eventually, your inner voice needs to become a safe place. Not a place where you constantly attack yourself. Not a place where every mistake becomes a catastrophe. Not a place where every delay becomes rejection. A place where you can say, okay, we'll handle this. Let's try again. You don't have to panic. You're allowed to grow. You're still here. That's powerful. The person you become after the 3 days. Maybe your life isn't completely different after 3 days. That's okay. The point was never to create a magical deadline. The point was to prove something to yourself. You can change the way you relate to your own mind. You can notice. You can interrupt. You can choose. You can return. And if you can do it for 3 days, you can do it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. The biggest mistake now. Don't turn these 3 days into another thing you're afraid to fail at. You don't need to say, I must think perfectly forever. No. You'll forget. You'll spiral. You'll react. You'll have bad days. And when you do, return. That's the entire practice. Return. The forward reset. When everything becomes overwhelming, remember 4 words. Come back to yourself. Come back from the comparison. Come back from the fear. Come back from the imaginary conversation. Come back from the endless predictions. Come back from the need for proof. Come back to, who am I? Who are you? You are not the last mistake. You are not the last rejection. You are not today's bank balance. You are not one person's opinion. You are not one bad day. You are not your current circumstances. You are not the story someone else told about you. You are the person who gets to decide what comes next. And that decision begins internally. The final conversation. Imagine someone asks you, "What do you believe about yourself now?" What would you answer? Maybe. I believe I can change. Maybe. I believe I can learn. Maybe. I believe I'm worthy. Maybe. I believe I can build the life I want. Maybe. I believe I can survive uncertainty. Maybe. I believe the future can surprise me. And maybe, the most important answer, I believe I can trust myself. The last lesson. You don't need to spend your life trying to control every external event. You don't need to predict every outcome. You don't need to know exactly how everything will happen. You need to decide who you are while it unfolds. That is where your power is. Because life will always contain uncertainty. There will always be unanswered questions. There will always be delays. There will always be things outside your control. But you can decide, I will not let uncertainty become my identity. Final emotional build. One day, you may remember how badly you wanted something, how desperately you searched, how many times you checked, how many signs you needed, how many nights you spent asking, when? And then, you'll realize something. The biggest change wasn't that you finally got the answer. The biggest change was that you stopped needing the answer to feel okay. You stopped chasing. You stopped begging. You stopped treating silence as rejection. You stopped treating delay as failure. You stopped treating uncertainty as danger. You became someone who could say, I don't know yet, and still be okay. That is freedom. You don't have to know how. Maybe you don't know how your life will change. That's okay. Maybe you don't know how the opportunity will arrive. That's okay. Maybe you don't know who will enter your life. That's okay. Maybe you don't know how your dream will happen. That's okay. You don't need to solve the entire future. You need to live today's chapter. And when tomorrow comes, live that one, the final message to yourself. Tonight, before you sleep, say this slowly. I am done fighting myself. Pause. I am done assuming the worst. Pause. I am done chasing proof. Pause. I am done letting temporary circumstances define me. Pause. Then, I choose a new conversation. I choose self-respect. I choose possibility. I choose patience. I choose courage. I choose to trust myself. And finally, I am becoming the person who naturally expects life to work out. Don't force it. Don't perform it. Just let the words settle. Final cinematic monologue. Narrator. Tomorrow morning, the world may look exactly the same. Your phone may have the same notifications. Your room may look the same. Your circumstances may appear unchanged. And that's okay, because now you know something you didn't know before. You don't need the outside world to immediately change before you can change the way you live inside it. You can wake up differently. You can speak differently. You can respond differently. You can choose differently. And when you repeatedly choose differently, you become different. And when you become different, Your life begins meeting a different version of you. So don't wake up tomorrow asking, did it happen? Ask, who am I today? Don't ask, where is the proof? Ask, what would the person I'm becoming do now? Don't ask, why isn't everything perfect? Ask, how can I move forward from here? And don't ask, when will my life finally begin? Because your life is already happening, right now. This moment, this breath, this decision, this conversation, and perhaps the life you've been waiting for doesn't begin when everything changes. Perhaps it begins when you stop waiting for everything to change before you allow yourself to become different. Narrator, slowly. So, for the next time doubt speaks, don't fight it, don't fear it, don't follow it. Simply answer, that's not the story I'm living anymore. And then, keep walking, because sometimes the first sign that your life is changing isn't something you see, it's the way you finally start talking to yourself. Talk to yourself like someone who already knows their worth. Stop chasing, stop checking, stop rehearsing the worst. Choose your inner conversation. Choose your state. Choose who you are becoming, and let the rest unfold.